Well, I was cycling in, yes, it was in Hungary, and I was heading to Pamplona, Spain,
Magyarország.
in the late '90s, and I stopped the first night. I hadn't trained at all. I'd wintered in Budapest, in Pest, and then took off for Pamplona to run with the bulls. I was going to ride all the way.
Was that winter in the Hungarian labor camps?
Yeah, well, almost. I was living with an old lady. Her name was Maria. I called her Maria Neni. She insisted on that, which kind of means grandma, grandma Maria.
Yeah, Maria Nani. How old was she?
She was in her 80s, and she told me stories about the Russian invasion and the 57 shootings and stuff. A lot of people were killed. She told me she spoke German at one time. She only spoke to me in Hungarian, and this is how I learned Hungarian, was just her talking to me every day. And
you learned your Hungarian from an 80-year-old Maria Nani.
Yeah. Living in southern Pest. Kind of, the ring that went around the city? It was below the ring.
Mm-hmm.
South of the ring a little bit. Right a few blocks away from the Danube. Anyways, so she was very religious, and I would watch television of the Pope.
She was Catholic?
As well as these,
Catholic or Protestant?
Yeah, very Catholic.
You did run into Protestant Hungarians.
They're Calvinists too. There's a Calvinist enclave near the Slovenian border. But anyway, so I learned my Hungarian from her, and then in the spring when the weather got nice, I wanted to go to Spain. So I said goodbye, and I took off for Spain. But I hadn't trained at all, so I was a wreck. My goal was to do 60 kilometers in the first day, so about 100 miles. Which you can do. It's pretty easy to do when you're in good shape. But I hadn't ridden at all, and I wanted to get to Lake Balaton though. That was the goal. So I got to Lake Balaton, and I went to a campground there at Lake Balaton, and there were all these Germans in caravans and their campers. Lake Balaton's a very, very big lake. I think it's the biggest lake in Europe, something like that. A lot of people fishing from the shore.
That could be true, but you know that the Cyrillic alphabet was created in Hungary. It was created by Bulgarians, Kirill and Methodi, but it actually they were Bulgarian monks who were at Lake Balaton. I'm sure you sensed that when you visited.
Really?
This is true.
I didn't know they were at Lake Balaton.
Yeah, they were Bulgarian monks, but the Cyrillic alphabet actually was created in Hungary. Why those guys were on some retreat or vacation. I think staying at an
that I was not aware of.
Airbnb, I think.
Well, it is interesting because at that lake, I met another young guy. He's our age, and his name was Vislav Bodkin, and he was half American and half Bulgarian. He spoke English fluently, and as we remember, we've been studying Bulgarian to go to Bulgaria, and you had actually, I think at this point, probably gotten to Bulgaria, but I was not yet there, and I turned away and never went. But anyway, so I was talking to him in Bulgarian a little bit, and we he wanted to talk about cycling. He was interested in cycling, and many years later, actually, he would become a cyclist and do quite a bit of cycling himself. Anyway, we kept in touch.
So you met Bodkin at the birthplace of his own language. Well, not his language, but his own alphabet.
Well, there you go. So Vislav is there, and we just hung out that night. We ate dinner together, cooked a little bit on my stove, shared some coffee. Great guy. He had a lot of plans. He was traveling himself, and I guess headed to Budapest, maybe back to Bulgaria. I don't remember exactly. But anyway, we kept up with each other, and very recently with this Human Side Press project, I'd spoken to him about my translation of Hamsun and Hamsun's poetry, and he mentioned to me that he had been translating into English the poetry of Varlam Shalamov, who I was familiar with from the Kolyma tales, these incredible stories, short stories of the gulag and labor camps of the 1930s during the Stalinist period. He was imprisoned there in a very, very tough place, in a tough environment for like close to 20 years, I guess. And so Bodkin tells me that he's got these translations and that he would like to potentially publish his book of poetry translations on the Human Side Press. And I said, yeah, man, for sure. And I guess also he's trying to translate a biography of Shalamov that, according to him, is not very well written in Russian.
Now he's translating it into Bulgarian or English?
Into English. I guess there would be no reason to translate it in Bulgarian because of the similarities in the language. It's also in Cyrillic. So he's sitting on.
That'd be like translating
anyway.
From Canadian to American English.
That's right.
Be like translating
anyway,
Jordan
so
Peterson into American English.
Well, that's what we've been doing. That's what we've tried to do in the last 3 podcasts. I think we've done a great job. So he's so misunderstood. But anyway, so Bodkin's got these. He gave me a couple of these poems. I put them up on my blog, and I mean, it's great stuff. I think maybe you've read a couple of these poems. It's just phenomenal. And it's every bit as good as the Kolyma Tales and Kolyma Stories. So it's just riveting stuff. So I'm really enthusiastic about him finishing this book and that biography. I guess try and put out the biography too. It's going to be interesting to see how many pages it actually is.
Why the poetry? I mean, why? I mean, after all the untranslated stories, why doesn't this Bodkin guy? I mean, what is his interest in the poetry? I mean, do you like the poet? What do you think his interest in the poetry is? I mean, do you personally like the poetry? I haven't read the poetry.
Well, Bodkin's actually the guy who told me about Shalamov originally and got me into the Kolyma Stories.
Yep.
And they've been translated into English. Not all of them, but I've read most of them, and they're phenomenal. And the poetry, according to Bodkin, was every bit as good, and it just is not known, and it's not known to Russians either. And so he sent me a couple of these, like I said, and I was very impressed. It's very different than the Hamsun stuff, but it has this very natural. The natural world plays a big part, like the Hamsun poems that I translated. So it's very exciting to read, and it kind of fits in alongside Hamsun, although Hamsun never had any of the anguish of a labor camp. But I think it'll be an event to publish. I guess the book of poetry comes from a compilation that just came out in Russia in the 90s. It was the first time it was ever properly put together as all of his poems. The Kolyma Notebooks is the translation. And so it's kind of not really known to Russian people. And there seems to be also quite a bit of suppression of Shalamov that happened throughout the course of his life, because his stories of the Stalinist labor camps were so extreme that Russian people, as well as the Khrushchev government, didn't really want that image during the Cold War to come out. They were much more comfortable with the Solzhenitsyn and the Gulag archipelago, which was not as extreme in terms of the terror and the death and all that happened, like it happened in the Kolyma labor camp.
I mean, in the Kolyma labor camps, it seems like life is very, very cheap. I mean, a guy gets impaled by a tree stump, and they just kind of pull his body from the tree stump matter of factly, and realize they have to cut down a lot of stumps now. I mean,
yeah.
It doesn't sound like they were places of reform, but almost like concentration camps.
It was a vacation destination. And well, part of the problem was the work was so hard, because I guess a lot of it was gold mining, and the work was so hard.
Did they actually get a decent amount of gold? I mean, were these productive mines?
It did. There's a lot of gold there. There was quite a lot of gold, and they were using the gold to fund the war effort. So it was quite important that they had this gold. And
I mean, this is kind of slavery, right? I mean, it's kind of.
Well, they were political prisoners and criminal prisoners, and and they were worked very, very hard in the. I guess it got to be like 50 below zero.
Jesus,
And
Jesus.
you just
They
never got enough food.
What was Shalamov thrown in jail for? I mean, was he a criminal?
Well, he apparently supported when Stalin was elected. He supported this paper by Lenin, and he was part of its publication, which talked about like the freedom of opinions within the Communist Party, how necessary it was. And Stalin viewed this as anti-Soviet activity. And this was really the initial crackdown when Stalin took over. And so all these people were accused of being Trotskyites and were sent to the camps. And I guess he was released at some point. After a number of years, he was released, and he was free for a year. But then he was rearrested because I guess Stalin changed his mind about releasing people. And anyone who had been accused and gone to a labor camp before, they just rearrested them and sent them back again, and basically said you're guilty of the same crime. So you were just you're basically just really screwed. And so he was there. Really, I guess he almost died during this period, but he was saved. He was saved because he could remember a lot of poetry, I guess, and some doctor liked him and got him a job that wasn't in the mines. Because I guess when you went to work in the mines, it was a death sentence. Because in the mines, you didn't have enough food. You weren't replacing the calories. You were burning, hauling stone out of the mines, searching for gold.
And they're using. I don't know if they're refining.
I
don't know if they were refining how they're getting the ore out there. I imagine that they were trying to process the ore as well. They're using caustic chemicals. I mean, so I'm sure these guys were living very short lives. You mentioned that
yeah, you didn't. Apparently, it didn't last long.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that the nature plays a role in this guy's work. I mean, are you talking about the severity of the Siberian landscape? That is it his ideas and his plot are being driven by this very intense frozen tundra?
Yeah, I mean, he's out there in the taiga, and I like that word, taiga. I don't know how you say it. I think it's taiga.
You've got to say it like Werner Herzog.
Yeah, taiga. That's how I learned it from. I'd never heard anyone say the word until Werner Herzog said it in that documentary. He, it's I guess it's brutal. The winters. Yeah, I think it's got all the, because you know where Kolyma is. It's right up next to Alaska, northern part of Alaska, the Bering Strait. I think that's where it's located. And interestingly enough, Shalamov's. I know this from Bodkin. Some of my email exchanges.
Wait,
with
wasn't
him.
Seward
He was
Fisheries?
telling me,
Wasn't Seward Fisheries once named like the Kolyma Fisheries?
well, almost. Shalamov's father was a Orthodox priest, and he was sent to Kodiak Island, and I guess after the sale of Alaska, all of these Russians were suddenly abandoned all throughout Alaska, which had formerly been Russia. And the Orthodox Church decided that it was necessary to protect its parishioners. And so they wanted to send more monks over to help protect them from sin and from being changed. And so it was kind of like this maintenance and missionary work of the Orthodox Church.
It's going to be
places where Russians live.
It's going to be hard to protect anybody from sin in Alaska. I can tell you that,
especially in Kodiak Island when you got those dock workers. I got all that blow and those wealthy deckhands with all their money thrown around. I mean, how can you stay Orthodox?
They fish fish very hard in Kodiak. I heard that that's not a boat you want to get on.
Well, at Kodiak, his father, I guess, he was there for a while. Shalamov was born later, but there was definitely this Alaska period for the family that the family remembered. And then But of course, all this happened before Lenin and World War One. I mean, it's interesting to think about all the different changes that happened during this guy's life. And unfortunately, he died in, I guess, the early '80s, and none of his works were really all that well known. And he was very disappointed in Solzhenitsyn, who became a Nobel Prize winner. And Solzhenitsyn presented this very different view of the gulags that Shalamov didn't really agree with. I guess there was this one story where Solzhenitsyn talks about having a pet cat, and Shalamov said to him, "What kind of gulag could you have a pet cat in? We would have eaten that cat within an hour."
Well, I mean, I know what happens to dogs.
Oh, did you read that story? Did you read that one story in the Cooling Tales about?
I think it's skimming through.
The guy ate a dog. The guy ate a dog, but he didn't know it, and then he said, "Oh yeah, but it did taste delicious."
No,
something.
well, that's one of them. But the one I'm thinking of is Tamara the bitch. Tamara gets shot with an automatic weapon, and one of the foresters buys the dog skin. They skin the dog after it was shot with the automatic weapon by the soldier, and the forester said it'll make good gloves, and he didn't mind the bullet holes. Now, I think he ends the story that way. If I remember correctly, he's not trying to plot something. I don't know how writers write these days. I don't know how they write fiction. I don't know where they get their ideas. But I mean, people that really haven't lived a very interesting or challenging life are probably troubled with plot or what to write. But if something happens like this, the drama or the narrative actually proceeds from memory. And he ends his short story, Tamara the bitch, with, he said the bullet holes in the hide didn't matter. And I guess that's poetic and final, but it probably was the last thing he remembered. And then he got on to the next story. I don't see how these modern writers can read Shalamov and forgive themselves for making something up and worrying about how something flows or sounds, because
but a lot of these modern people, they, for one thing, they don't have the material, so they mask it with their artifice. They learn a bunch of fancy words and fancy constructions, and they use that to mask their lack of material. Shalamov was sitting on, like, I guess 20 years of labor camp stories that he had experienced himself or heard experienced. So I mean, this guy was sitting on just a wealth of material that, on top of it, I think he felt an obligation to write. Like, he felt like he needed to record this somehow for all the dead who had passed and could no longer speak. I mean, there was a sense of injustice that he was trying to write and make just through this writing. And that he never gets emotional. It's always a very steady hand that he writes with. I mean, he's just a master. The guy's a master. You know, it's like, have you ever read that fella Chekhov?
Yep.
Another Russian guy. That he kind of has that similar style. Shalamov has a similar style to him, which is you could take these horrific events. But to really show their horror, you don't have to overstate the event. You just have to tell it the way it was. Tell it how you saw it. Tell it with the words that really give the moment and give that image an event. Show the action, because there are, in writing there are right words. There are right words and wrong words, and I think a lot of these fancy MFA writers, they get off on showing off with words instead of really trying to understand the word that corresponds to the event, that will, in the images created for the reader, will provoke the emotion. You don't have to explain any of it. It'll all be there if you could tell it. You could tell it with the right word. And Shalamov does. And I mean, we're reading him in translation, and I think even in translation it comes through that this guy is extremely careful with the way he's writing. It must be very simple, the Russian that he writes with. Well, I mean, I don't know if it's simple, but the constructions are simple. It doesn't seem to be very convoluted.
Well, I mean, there's not really a matter of interpretation when you are talking about a dog being shot or your toe freezing off or losing your hand in a gold mine in Siberia. I mean, really, what is there to interpret? I mean, there's the feeling has to be evoked in the reader, and either the readers are going to say that they disagree with the plot and they're missing the point because this actually happened, or they're moved and affected by the realization that this is a man that had gone through hell and lived and had written about it. Solzhenitsyn said that he was trembling when he first read Shalamov and said that he saw him as a brother. Now the thing is that Shalamov obviously experienced the real gulag, and you were saying Solzhenitsyn kind of experienced the resort version of the gulag.
Well, I guess Shalamov said to Solzhenitsyn when Solzhenitsyn described his experiences, Shalamov said to him, "Oh, I could have lived there a long time. That would have been just fine," or something. But he, that Solzhenitsyn, he wrote that book, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich.
Okay,
am I saying that right? It's it's a short story novella kind of thing. I remember reading it. I haven't read it in a long time. I can't really remember. And he became popular with that. And then he wanted to write
he won a Nobel Prize, didn't he?
Yeah, but he won it for the Gulag Archipelago, which apparently was not entirely his experience. Like he used the experiences of a bunch of other people and didn't credit them and put them in the book. And one of the people he went to try and get his experiences was Shalamov. And he asked Shalamov if Shalamov would be like a co-author. And Shalamov turned him down, didn't want anything to do with it. But apparently, like, some of these experiences from Shalamov were still taken by Solzhenitsyn and used, which really made Shalamov angry. So this Solzhenitsyn guy goes off and becomes this hero in all the West. He becomes this Nobel Prize winner. And meanwhile, Shalamov is in Russia. He's very sick from all of his disabilities from the camps. And he's more or less unpublished.
Hey, have I told you about my short story on about the Calvinist Hungarian minister who fed me magyarfretes cherry soup?
Yeah, that happened to me. That didn't happen to you.
Yeah. Yeah, but
actually, the strange thing is that happened.
Who's gonna know? But who's gonna know?
Well, they wouldn't. You'd be like a modern contemporary Solzhenitsyn. You just steal it away. Steal all the stories. You become a Nobel Prize winner.
I've got another.
But you know that Calvinist minister, that whole thing happened. I think that might have been like the next day after Lake Balaton. I ran into that guy and his wife after I met Bodkin at the lake. I think it was the next day. I pulled the old trick at Lake Balaton at the campground. Instead of paying, remember how I used to ride into those campgrounds and we just ride in real confidently and we wouldn't stop to pay or anything. We just parked the bikes.
The French know that if you're riding a bicycle and you look like you're a member of a team and you have great confidence, no officials are going to stop and question you. You're obviously on official business.
No, but even when the officials would step out of their offices, you just kind of wave at them and just drive by, and they think, the guy, they must be a part of like some camper that already paid. They go back into their office. No one ever bothers you. But the real trick is when you leave. You got to leave with even a greater sense of confidence. You can't ride too fast. You don't want to ride too slowly either. You don't want to have the guy be able to come out and actually chase you down. You want to ride just fast enough that you leave the campground, so that if he were to run out yelling after you, you would have plausible deniability that you didn't hear him, you didn't know anything about it. If the police were to be called and get you later, but when you get out of sight, you need to turn it on. You need to really fucking turn it on and get out of town.
Right. So this is
get away.
So the topic is on escaping campgrounds.
Yeah, so I left that campground at Balaton, and that's when I at the border of Slovenia I met the storm cloud came over, and I met the Calvinist minister at his church, and I had with his wife and his small child that cherry soup, which was delicious. You've had that cherry soup, right?
Yeah, and I said that it was Medjes Retes, which is wrong. It's Medjes Leves. It's
Leves is soup.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Medjes Retes is an actual pastry. I've had the cherry soup. It's there's no culture that uses sour cherries like the Hungarians, and they match the sour cherries with roasted sausage. They take the sausage and they put it in an oven and they roast it under a slow heat for a couple of hours, and it turns sticky and dry, but still succulent. And then they pull out the baking pan and then just pull off pieces of it, and it's this feathery, silky chorizo style. And then they cut the fat with it by putting the sour cherries in their mouth and drinking feherbor, which is a white wine, or maybe some Medjes Palinka, some cherry brandy. But so this Calvinist gave you the soup.
The soup? Yeah, but you're telling me that there was sausage in the soup?
No. The sausage, you would bake it in a pan, and then you would actually have a bowl of the fermented cherries. That was in like
you eat the cherries with the sausage?
Yeah,
I didn't do that.
And those cherries, the fermented cherries, they would pull them out of the compote jar and throw them in the soup to make the soup. They're
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
One of the other things that Maria Neni in Pest she would give to me were these very old bottles. She didn't drink alcohol at all, but she knew that I drank alcohol from all the bottles I would bring and keep in my room.
What were you drinking?
I drank a lot of bull's blood of eager. Very cheap, very cheap. Man, it's a nasty wine that would just sit in my stomach. It would make me sick, but it was very, very cheap.
What was it called? Eger Bikavor, or what was that called?
Yeah, Bikavar, Eger Bikavar.
Yeah,
that's what it was. But she saw this, and so she started. Her brother, his name was Shandor, and he lived in Shekes Fekarvar, and he would give her bottles of his homemade wine. So she had all these bottles, but she never drank them. So she started giving me the bottles. I didn't even know how old this wine was, and I just started drinking it. And this made me terribly ill drinking this wine. But I kept drinking it because I felt bad that I'd be turning down all this wine. Some of the bottles are probably newer than others, or better vintages from Shandor. And
wait. So Shandor was giving you his wine moonshine, these unmarked bottles. That
unmarked bottles. Unmarked bottles.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
It sounds like a headache. It sounds like a headache, literally.
Yeah, but I didn't get as sick as I did from those cheap bull's blood of eager. Those were nasty. Those really hurt. But anyway, I got a few letters from Maria Neni. She wanted to know when I was coming back. I always remember her story about she's after 1957. I guess she was speaking German with one of her friends, and a Russian soldier pointed a pistol right at her head and said, "Keep speaking in German, and I'll pull the trigger." And she said she never spoke German again. This was when she was trying to talk to me, and she was trying to figure out how to talk to me, and my Hungarian was so bad. She tried to use a few words of German, which were the first words of German she'd spoken since 1957. And she told me that story in Hungarian. This was all very slow in the beginning. When you have a dictionary and you're trying to figure out what someone's saying, it's just everything took a long time.
Right.
But
you weren't trying to say thank you for the delicious food. You realized she was talking about a wartime experience.
Yeah, I figured it out what she was talking about. But I mean, you went through the same thing, no doubt. You were trying to learn the language. It's extraordinarily hard language to learn for English speakers. And
nagyon nehéz a magyar. I had a nanny. I had a nanny too, man. She had a serial code etched on her arm by the Germans.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, she was a Hungarian Jew, and I was dating this Hungarian girl. Real catch. She was a really special girl. You might know her.
That girl was the craziest girl I ever heard of.
Yeah,
that girl was batshit crazy.
The actual experience of consummating a relationship with her was quite extraordinary. And I was living in Buda at the time, and the woman below us was a Irma nanny. And Irma nanny, we hadn't seen her for a couple of weeks. We assumed that she was dead, as old people tend to transpire as they reach their twilight years. And we asked her what she had done, and she said, "Well, I went to Paris." And we said, "Well, who did you go with?" She said, "I went by myself. It was my birthday, so I took myself to Paris." So Irma Nanny was a very independent woman, and there was another elderly couple that would shuffle out from time to time and rake leaves. I was living in the foothills of Buda, towards the end of the Villamos, almost near the town that buttresses Budapest. It slips my memory at the time, but
how close were you to the museum in Buda, the art museum?
So I was at the end of the Villamos, so it would have been about 30 minutes to the castle district, and then
because I don't know Buda. I didn't really know Buda at all. I only went there to go to the museum to see there's a great Hungarian painter called Csontváry Koska, and he was unacclaimed in his life, but there's some huge painting. He did very, very big paintings, but they're all kept at this museum. You can see them there. That was really the only reason I went to Buda.
We've got to take a trip out to Budapest and film it. Definitely.
Well, apparently it's very changed. When we were both there, it was kind of the second Prague. Like all the westernization that had happened in Prague was coming down the Danube to Budapest, and it was gonna be there, and people are saying it was imminent. And then I think when Hungary got into the European Union and all the pretty girls could leave and find wealthy boyfriends, that was pretty much the end. Then it became just like Prague or just like anywhere else.
Well, right before I left, right before I moved to Bulgaria, I was living in this old home in a forest, and it was impossible to find. Anybody that tried to visit me would get lost for 2 or 3 hours asking neighbors where this Utsa, where this street was. It was a gravel road, and the Nouveau Riche were coming in, and they were just absolutely decimating the forest and building these ghastly suburbs. But not in my neighborhood. I was able to run every day through these forests, and there was an old airfield from World War I, and it had grown. It filled in with this deep grass, and I would run through the deep grass, and up through the hills, and then back into the forest. I'd go out for 1 or 2 hour runs. And right before I left Hungary, I was running through one of the most beautiful, untouched forested areas, and there was suddenly a 2-acre clearing. They'd clear-cutted everything, and they were digging up the ground to put in water mains, and they were stretching power lines. And imagine they were turning this untouched portion of Buda. And this was right before it turned into a small village, a small farming village, into the suburbia. But
well, I imagine Budapest is now like Prague or like anywhere else. It's got the same people. It's one of these international city centers. I know that it's a stopping point now for these jet setter people, and I mean even Sofia, Bulgaria is, according to Bodkin. his reports from down there would indicate that Sofia is now just as Western in terms of its composition and the people that are there and the businesses as Prague or Budapest. The East and the West are not really very different anymore.
It's been 2 decades since I've visited Sofia, but did I ever tell you about the dead woman that I resurrected in Hungary?
No, what was that?
So the beautiful, splendid woman who I was dating was she claimed she was an actress, and so she had an Irish poet compose a play about her extraordinary life and the extraordinary things that she had experienced and accomplished by her ripe age of 22, and it was opening night, and I had actually volunteered to help in the production of this drama, and actually was a character in the drama later on. When the Buddhist monk was sick, I actually had to shave my head and play the role of the Buddhist monk. But this was opening night. This was before I actually had to fill in as an extra. And I was out on a run, and I was going to curtail my run in order to make the opening night performance. It was actually well attended. I think there were probably about 100 people there. And I was out running along this one area, and there's a clearing where the forest had been cleared for an electrical line. And I saw what looked like a trash dump, or something that had been dumped perhaps 200 meters down this steep slope where the power lines descended into a smaller village. And I had actually walked into this village before with this woman, but I was on my run. But after I passed it, about 5 seconds transpired, and I had this eerie feeling that something wasn't right about this trash dump. So I retraced my steps, and I descended to what I thought was just a abandoned mass of clothing or trash, and it was a body. And it was this babushka, for lack of a better word, this old woman wearing a dress with a bandana tied around her head, carrying a sack of potatoes and radishes that had spilled. And I thought that I had encountered someone who had transpired. But as I looked into her eyes, they opened. And they began to blink.
Wait, she was laying there. She was laying there with spilled vegetables?
She was laying there with spilled vegetables. She had a sachet of radishes and potatoes that had spilled. And
she was laying in the trash?
She wasn't. There was no trash. What I thought was trash was in fact a person.
Oh, Jesus!
I wasn't wearing my glasses. I wore glasses at the time, and I didn't run with my glasses, so my eyesight was poor. So what I saw in the distance oftentimes deceived me, and her face was badly cut, and there was dried blood from the corner of her eye running down to her cheek. And not being able to really carry her to safety, and not knowing the extent of her injuries, I realized that I had my run, which was a training run, which was subsequently to turn into a attendance of an opening night of a theatrical performance for my then girlfriend. I realized it had turned into a rescue mission, so I ran as quickly as I could 2 miles down the embankment.
Did you talk to her? Did you talk to the woman?
I said something to the extent of,
How was your
yo estate kivano kurek neni na jonyol. Is everything okay? Good evening.
Yeah.
Good evening, old grandmother. Is everything okay? And she just blinked, but she looked like she was on the edge of death. And she may well have been due to dehydration, or who knows how long she had been there. So I found a small home that happened to be hooked up to a telephone, and I said, "There's an old woman," and this is my Hungarian skills weren't as I had just moved there, moved to Buda, and my Hungarian wasn't as fluent as it probably could have been, and I said, "There was an old woman, and she's troubled. There's a troubled old woman, and she's very bad. There's a bad old woman." We must call an ambulance.
There's a bad troubled babushka. They probably said, yeah, there are a lot of those.
And miraculously, they put me on the phone. They put me on the phone with the ambulance, and in my broken Hungarian, they basically said, "Do you speak English?" And I said yes, and they tried a couple words of English, but they couldn't speak English. So I said, well, look, I don't know where I am, but this man knows where I am, and so I put the homeowner on the phone in this tiny little rural hut, and he gave directions, and I have no idea how they found it, but the ambulance went up this dirt road to this home. And it was 3 young people. They were wearing designer jeans and nice shirts, and they greeted me. Oh, all of them spoke fluent English. This is what I remember. And they said, "Wow, this is so great that you've done this." This is before we even reached the old woman. And I mentioned that I was trying to make a performance, and they said, "Oh, well, why don't you go and make the performance? And that would be terrible. That would be tragic if you missed it." And I said, "No. I want to direct you to this old woman." And we the ambulance went up this bumpy, rocky road. I have no idea how they did it. And then all these young people in the designer jeans and T-shirts. I think it was a cute 25-year-old girl and probably 2 guys that were probably her age. Walked down with their medical kits and then addressed the woman and tried to pick her up and ask her what had happened. She had fallen and she had smashed her head on some rocks, is basically what had happened. And she had soiled herself. And so actually, if I remember it correctly, they first tried to pick her up, but they had soiled their hands. And so they then put on gloves.
They soiled their designer jeans?
Their
designer jeans.
No, I think it was just their hands, and they realized, well, we should put on some gloves. And they lifted her up into a stretcher, and she kicked and screamed and moaned. She moaned. She was not that really capable of kicking and screaming. And they brought her into the ambulance, and they took her stats. And I don't know what her disposition was. I mean, she had a bad day, and she had fallen and hit her head. But they thanked me. I mean, she probably could have died if she had been left abandoned, for another day or so. But Hungarian nannies are pretty tough. So I felt that I'd done a pretty good job of saving the old woman, and I ran down to the small home in which I lived at the time, and I showered. We had a nice hot shower, and it was a bathtub, but it had a shower fixture on it, and I dressed myself, and I was 2 hours late to this performance. I'd missed it, and the Hungarian girlfriend said to me at the time, That's a great lie. I don't know how you were able to make up such a story. And never believed me. She just thought that I just matter-of-factly made that up. And I realized that her ability to lie and manipulate far exceeded mine, because if she heard such a story and realized, well, I could have done a much better job of making up some shit to miss a performance, it kind of was an indication of our the foundation of our relationship together. But I digress.
Yeah,
well, I digress.
That girl was batshit crazy. That girl was. Did you know that she got in touch with me? You knew that, but she also got the cell phone numbers of those twin guys that I knew in college somehow, and started calling them. She somehow found out about my brother and my brother's marriage, and sent an email saying she was going to crash the wedding in France. and I mean, I never physically seen this person. I don't even. So I was general at this wedding. I was very concerned that she was going to show up. I didn't know if she could somehow get to France.
You know, I'm looking at a blanket that my grandmother Alice, incredible woman, she lived until 100 years, and she would knit these intricate blankets that would take her about a year. I've got 2 of them. They're some of my prize gifts, and but she began to receive letters from this young woman.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my God.
And she also would send letters to my parents, and apparently my mother would actually respond to these letters, and it was proclaiming that I was a callous-hearted young man who had abandoned her and rejected her love, and but it was only years later that I learned that she had in fact attempted to engage my grandmother as well. I don't think my grandmother responded to her letters, but
well, she tried. She also tried to get in touch with my brother. She tried with my brother when he, she tried to contact him. Well, he asked me, "Who is this person contacting me? Do you know this person?" And I said, "Don't respond. Don't respond." And I also remember, maybe I told you about this, when I was down in Miami, she, when I was trying to start up that club down in Miami.
Wait.
Very strange email.
She pursued you in Miami. I had no idea that. Because
I got this very strange email.
That's like 10 years down. That's like 10 years later.
Yeah, it was 10 years after. But I got this very strange email, and it wasn't written in perfect English, so it kind of looked a little foreign. And it was someone saying like all the things that I was interested in were kind of all the things that they were interested in, and maybe we could work together on something. And it was
Heidegger and jazz and
no. It was naming lots of music stuff. It was very, on the surface, very knowledgeable, and it seemed very legit. But if you looked at it closely, it seemed to have been picking stuff from little crumbs of information that I'd left everywhere, and it was just too perfect. And I realized it's got to be her. I didn't even respond to it. I just blocked the person. But I realized it was her. It had to be. There was no one that would come up with something that was just so. It was just too perfect.
Well, you know, I was teaching English in Bulgaria, and I was teaching in a formal classroom at a university, and class had just gotten out, and it was one of those typical nights where the cafeteria closed at 7, and my class ended at 6:30. And the only way I could really get a solid meal was in the cafeteria, just because it was difficult for me to cook, and the cafeteria food was great, even though the Bulgarian students thought it was terrible. I thought Bulgarian food was great, and it was one of those nights where my students, not trying to take advantage of me, but just trying to learn more and follow up, and I was flattered, would keep me until about 7:15, and then I would realize, well, I missed dinner, and now I'm going to have to attempt to cook for myself, which was boiling potatoes and dumping in sunflower oil and mixing it with some mayonnaise and maybe some pastet, which was this liver pate in a can, which was pretty much dog food, but it tasted good. And this girl, it was a Bulgarian girl, came and said, "Well, someone left this shirt for you." And it was a shirt that the Hungarian girl had given me, but I had left behind. It was the only thing I'd left behind. I was able to reclaim all of my possessions when I returned to Bulgaria, to get all my books and my clothing, to return when I returned to Hungary in Budapest to get my things. It was the one thing that I'd left behind. So she had apparently found a Hungarian student who studied at this university, and had contacted him. And when he visited his parents on break, she gave him my shirt and instructed him to give it to somebody who didn't have a connection to him. And when I asked,
Jesus.
and when I asked the girl who who she got the shirt from. She said, well, no, it was left at the office. It was very, very vague. And I knew this was my shirt. And she said, no, you left the shirt behind at the front desk. You were at the library and you left your shirt. And so we're just giving you back your shirt. And I almost believed the story because I thought, well, perhaps this is my shirt. And I realized, no, I haven't seen this shirt for 6 or 7 months. So that was the closest she got to me in Bulgaria.
Yeah, it's incredible though. Like I think a lot of guys don't really think that women can be like this diabolical, and they can. They could be just as diabolical as any man. You know, like there's that film. What is that? Fatal Attraction.
Right.
You know, boiling the rabbit and stuff like that.
Right.
This girl was that. She was that. She was exactly that. And that it's not fiction. This is true.
Well, the campaign she created when I left to Bulgaria, she shaved her head, and she went and individually visited everyone that I had known in her attempt to foster a campaign of either bringing me back or invoking a sense of shame or guilt. And she had gone. What upset me the most is I had private students, and she went to the parents of the private students and read them letters out of context, egregiously out of context, and all of the parents said this
stuff you'd written,
stuff I had written to her,
right,
explaining the nature of our separation and most notably the permanence of our separation. I was firm. I was using what they call an iron fist technique to assert the finality of the termination of the arrangement, but she had taken out things very, very contextually, and they said that it didn't sound like me, and they were shocked. And she actually, she wasn't able to win them over.
These parents though must not have accepted any of this. Did they contact you about her? I mean, how did you find out that she had done this, or she told you?
I had found out from close friends and allies. She wasn't very popular. She had burned many bridges, and she had violated the trust of many Hungarian intellectuals. My main supporters were.
She came from a good family, right? I mean, she on the outside she wasn't crazy on the outside. She seemed like a smart person. Didn't you say like her father was like some physicist or something like that?
Yeah,
like very acclaimed.
Her father was actually a famous black hole physicist who you can do research on him. And black hole physicists obviously have a limitation to their fame because of the utility of their research. Of course, it's probably very useful now, but at the time, he wasn't a Stephen Hawking's, but he was in a black hole.
But she had been raised in a very intellectual household, so she seemed on the outside like a pretty cool, sophisticated girl, but
very smart. And her Hungarian was obviously very poetic. She was very intellectual. Her English was perfect. She had lived in Los Angeles because of her.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. And her father was actually able to get a job in the early '80s in Los Angeles. He was
doing physics in California.
Right, because it wasn't very political. He told me about when I first had dinner with her family. They were interviewing me, and I told that she introduced me as a philosopher, and he was very skeptical about my claim to being a philosopher. And he said, "Well, have you read Karl Popper?" Karl Popper was someone who I always wanted to do my PhD. He had studied something philosophical, but he was
that philosophy of science. That
falsification. Exactly. He was referencing the philosophy of science. I guess black hole physics is indebted to theory, so he was
probably like there's probably a lot of Heisenberg.
But he said he couldn't quote Popper because Popper had some connection to the Cold War, and he was kind of forbidden. And so we talked at length about Popper, and he was
Well, there was that whole open society thing. That's what Soros
that was I think that was
about.
the sore point. That was the sore point. So he was delighted that I knew Popper intimately, and I studied the philosophy of science, and I had taken a course on inductive logic, and in inductive logic had a lot of proponents of free markets or free thinking, or of this scientific method that challenged this Soviet attitude. And
so he was pretty impressed by you.
Yeah, the parents cooked me this soup. Now, it would probably turn the stomachs of most people, but if you're welcome to a Hungarian family's home, what they're probably going to cook for you is their famous fish levesh, and it doesn't really have much to it, and I don't know the historical context of it. I mean, I know that there's wartime food in Great Britain, shepherd's pie, and it's considered very bland, and this was a very bland soup, and it had a floating fish bladder. Every bowl had a floating fish bladder, and the fish was from the Danube, and the Danube was very polluted, but there were maybe a few...
You eat the bladder? Did you eat the bladder?
You would bite into the bladder and take a nibble off of it, and my culinary tastes are very adventurous, and I might have eaten the bladder whole, and so they must have either been aghast or impressed by my courage.
Oh, you ate it. They served you it. You just started eating the bladder right away.
It was a floating bladder, and I just pierced it with my teeth, and I
like,
swallowed it.
This looks good.
Yeah, I've made similar mistakes in France by eating the scales off a fish, and my French isn't very good. But how would you translate "je ne recommende"? Je ne recommende. It means like I don't recommend. I don't recommend.
Is that what you're trying to say?
I think when I was eating some fish scales in a rural French place when I was on a solo cycling trip, I ate the fish with the skin, and they said to the next client, I don't recommend what he's doing. It's not a good idea.
Can't eat this. Yeah, but I don't know. Eating fish scales or fish bladders. I've never eaten a fish bladder. You nibbled on the fish bladder?
So you
ate the whole thing?
I ate the whole damn thing. I pierced it with my teeth and I swallowed it, and I thought, it was obviously if it's served to me.
And nobody said anything? It was okay?
They said you must really love our food. And
so it was a good evening though. But did the parents say anything? Like, did the father take you aside and say, "Yeah, my daughter's a bit different," or was there ever that discussion?
Well, her sister began to engage in a monologue about her, and told me to be careful, and that I had aided in her escape. Apparently,
well, her sister took you aside to tell you this.
Well, no, at the dinner table, her sister said that, look, she's really supposed to be supervised by our family, and she's really not supposed to move out because she's a threat to herself and perhaps to society as a whole. And
she said that at the dinner table.
Yeah, at the dinner table, and they also had
everybody's speaking English though. Everyone's speaking English.
Yeah, everyone is speaking English at the time, and because her sister was studying to be an English teacher, the parents were obviously very erudite and well traveled, and
right.
I sidestepped these observations, and I mentally parked them, and I thought this might be an indication that there could be trouble ahead. But I had a great dinner with the family, and they demonstrated their key purchases from their travels abroad. It's difficult to buy certain things and bring them back. But he would choose very strange things. When he was a professor in Japan, the Japanese have blinds that have a remote control and that move left to right and close. And he was very fond of demonstrating this to me because no one else in his block had such an automatic blind. And I thought, well, it takes about a second to turn a blind. What's the point? But I told him that it was great. And
so he showed you this. He showed you these Japanese gadgets.
Yeah, he showed
turning his blinds left to
he
right.
showed me his blind, his automatic blind, and then the mother had noticed I was wearing an olive drab coat, which in America at the time didn't indicate that you were in the army, but in Europe apparently it meant that you were in the army. So I was basically wandering around Budapest looking like a soldier most of the time, in Bulgaria subsequently. But it had a long tear on it, and so she had. The mother had sewn the while I was talking to the father, she just took my coat and began to sew the long tear. Now the Hungarian girlfriend said that now I was indebted to her family because they had repaired my jacket, and her father had shown me things that he wasn't even supposed to show me because they were illegal purchases. But this is post-communism, so I didn't really think that they were going to get in trouble. But I did subsequently help her escape. She described her departure from her childhood room as an escape, and we packed all her clothes. And
wait, so when you met this crazy girl, she was living at home and she moved in with you? Is that what happened? And they were worried about that?
Yeah, they were. Well, it was a bit more complicated because I had taken a flat in Pest, and I had signed a 6-month lease, and I 2 or 3 months after tiring of Pest, I decided that I would explore and look for a room in the foothills, and so I found an advertisement for student housing at this university, and I took a trek out to this old home, and I lived with 2 Hungarian students, 2 females, a gypsy and a non-gypsy Hungarian. And I had this free apartment, and I thought, well, I will liberate this poor girl, and I liberated her by packing up her stuff and moving her to my flat. And so I would spend half my time living in Pest, and then half my time living in Buda. So I had this ability. Now,
well, this might explain though quite a bit of her infatuation with you and why she was so heartbroken and trying to track you down and crazy about you for literally. I mean, if I'm saying the last contact I had with her, I believe happened in about like 2008 or 2009. That's literally like that's like 10 years after you originally were with her. And I bet even to this day she probably still thinks about you if she's still alive.
Well, I wonder if she celebrates different anniversaries and redoubles her efforts to find me. But
she could. But the reality is though, I think now that at least during those times it was very hard still for a Hungarian to travel. They weren't part of the EU. And I think now she probably could come to the U.S. if she wanted to, couldn't she?
Yeah, she could. I mean, and I welcome her in her travels to this great country. My feeling about Bulgaria at the time though was that I had made very good friends in Bulgaria, and Bulgarians are.
But you had to go to Bulgaria. I mean, you were forced. Her craziness ran you out of Budapest. You had to leave.
I sadly had to leave my friends behind in Budapest.
What was the decisive moment? Or I mean, obviously there was a lot of craziness, but was there something in particular that
I saw an opportunity?
You felt like
she wanted to visit the Gimes region in Romania, so she and the Irish poet took a trip to Gimes, and at that time,
who was the Irish poet? Who's the Irish poet?
He was an Irish poet who had written the drama of which he was the actress.
Yeah, that's right.
And there was a drama. There was a contingency of Irish poets, and I felt
There's always an Irish poet. There's a lot of Irish poets. That Yeatsian Joycean tradition. It's very strong.
I felt very slighted because I felt that I was one of the key intellectual figures in Budapest at the time, expatriate writers.
But you were. I heard, at least according to you, that you spent most of your days sitting in a bathtub reading Nietzsche.
I did when I lived in Pest, and then I would escape to a library later, and I'll get to this. But the Irish poets began to create performances and group poetry readings, and they didn't invite me on the card. They didn't invite me, and when I showed up one day, they wanted to charge me. And there was a very heated. They wanted to charge me an entrance fee, and I felt very slighted. And so there was a.
Wait, but they were inviting this girl.
No, they were inviting the other Irish poets to read, and then the girl she got in free, just by virtue of her association with other Irish poets. So there was a fallout. I had a fallout with the Irish poet community in Budapest at that time, but she eventually found out that I had this second residence in the foothills, and one night I was sleeping, and at 2 a.m. a taxi pulls up, and she begins shouting, and she had discovered where I lived, and my roommates had a very rude introduction to her existence. Because she told the driver to leave, and she proceeded to come into the home. And I had a very, very small and modest room. It was I had a piece of foam with a blanket over it where I slept, and so she invaded my presence. And so then I found various libraries that were on the outskirts of Budapest where I could do my reading and my work, and she would find me. Every place I would go to, she would eventually find me. And even when I was in Bulgaria at the library in Blagoevgrad, she found the main telephone number of the head librarian. And I was deep in the stacks, almost falling asleep one day after a long day of reading and writing. And the head librarian came to me, and she knew me as an English teacher. And she said, "James, there's a call for you." And I thought that was very strange. I thought perhaps it was the head of the English as a second language department, and there was a telephone call waiting for me, and it was her. She had found the number and made a very expensive long distance call to contact me.
Jesus Christ. Well, she called the one of those twins that I was friends with. She called I guess he was living at home, and then he would go to work in northern Jersey, and the workers were all given, like, if they wanted to, they could stay at this house. So there would be like a bunch of young guys who were consultants for I don't know, I think it was Arthur Anderson or something like that. So he was living there, but not there that often because he'd go home. She got the number of this place and called there. They're like, there's this Hungarian girl who wants to talk to you. He's like, who is this? And she's asking about me.
I wasn't aware that she had contacted the New Jersey headquarters of Arthur Anderson, but perhaps that contributed to the fall of Anderson. Perhaps Enron and MCI. We're not.
This is all before that happened.
Yeah.
There's a link somewhere, but General, it's people do not understand when someone says like somebody could be like obsessed and diabolical and just the treachery involved and the trickery and deceit to be able to get information. The information is all out there, and it's probably more out there now more than ever. I mean, she was doing this back before the internet really was a big thing.
I mean, this is a good segue into Botkin's translation of Shalamov, because the obsession with the power structure in Russia and the minor violations that would cause an obsession and insanity, an insane obsession with incarcerating and castigating these thinkers for minor violations. And there were these I don't know how.
Well, I mean, certainly, you're right that the sense that you had this idea that, I mean, you probably felt like at some point in your life that she could be around any corner. She could be calling people. She's talking to my grandmother. She's talking to my mother. She's talking to my friends. She's talking to my friends of my friends. She did all of that. There's that sense of someone watching you and scoping out your next move, which certainly has a lot to do with like that whole era of the East. In general, it's actually a very interesting Eastern experience that you had of this a stalker, but I mean, the state stalking someone is not very much different than an individual stalking someone.
Right. I mean, it's been observed that the fiat currency is the victory medal of the state, but it's oftentimes driven by the desire to satisfy some female demand, and then conversely, the structure of the state can be used to hunt down those that stray from some narrative, whether it's the female narrative or the state narrative. I really don't see a difference. I mean, the woman is a builder of the state. I think that she's used it to her advantage, and I wonder if the desire of females to control the world and to shape the world in their own image hasn't been influenced by the Russian gulags.
You know what it's really about? It's about boiling rabbits. It's about calling all the friends in Jersey from Hungary. Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know. It's hard to build a metaphor on this crazy bitch, but that's the craziest. That's the craziest bitch I ever heard of, but they're real. For all the young men listening out there, the crazy bitches are real. They will hunt you down. They will call everybody you know. They will come after you for 10 years after you've seen them the last time. They'll talk to your friends that don't even know them. They'll entice anybody they can. General, it's the most extraordinary story, and I would not have believed it was true. I would have thought it was some Hollywood kind of stuff. But
I think in my old age, as these experiences have mellowed in the charred casks of a nice whiskey barrel, that I actually can look at these experiences fondly and now write about them. But there were things that I blocked out in order to live positively. I mean,
she contacted my brother. Did you know that? She contacted my brother.
So
I mean, it's just extraordinary. First she contacted him, and then years later, she said she tried to contact me and said she was going to his wedding. She was going to crash his wedding. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
What is
stuff. Ridiculous?
I mean, what do you think the intention was? I mean, that she would go to the wedding, that there would be some reconciliation between you, your brother, and your family, and then that would lead to some.
I have no idea, but I tend to think that whatever she was saying to me or to anybody, the twin friends that I had at the time, or my brother, it was about you. It wasn't about anyone else. So this was all about you. It wasn't. She did not intend to start relationships with any of these people that were tangential to you. She really wanted you. That might have not have seemed clear to anybody, but I think looking back at it,
I mean, this is no different than
what it was about.
Than what a very nasty and strong state wants. I mean, the state wants. If I look at Shalamov's life, the state wants. When you say that she wanted me, the state wants the total consent of the individual. Because if you look at Shalamov's life, he, in order for him to publish his poetry, he had to renounce certain things. I mean, if you look at his life, the Soviet authorities then forced him to sign a statement after he had sent his work, the Kolyma Tales. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Is it Kolyma? Is that how it's pronounced?
I think it's I think so. I don't know. I don't know Russian.
So
Kolyma?
So he stated that in order to publish his poetry, he had to sign a statement in which he stated that the topic of the Kolyma Tales was no longer relevant after the 20th Party Congress, that he had never sent out any manuscripts, and that he was a loyal Soviet citizen. Once he had renounced Kolyma Tales, he was permitted to publish his poems in the Soviet Union, and they began to appear in literary journals in 1956. I mean, I think, and that's funny, because in 56 is exactly when Russia began to invade Hungary. So I think that there's a connection between Shalamov's renunciation of his Kolyma Tales and the invasion of Hungary by the Soviets, which is
well. I think I know from some stuff that Bodkin has discussed with me that there was a real after Stalin died and the Khrushchev period began. There was the country was trying to reckon with the fact that Stalin had been this cult of personality and this just labor camps for everybody and all this killing. They were trying to reckon the injustice of that era. Also, though, with a reformation of the Soviet system that could continue. They didn't want to have all this evil that was done by Stalin associated with the Soviet system itself. So because they had the Cold War going on as well. And the Western powers were looking to make propaganda out of all of this killing that Stalin had done. They would have loved to have read Shalamov and said, "Look how evil the communists are." So Shalamov was dangerous to the Soviet state in a way because of the truthful nature of what he was expressing about what had happened. So there was real reason to suppress what he was saying, and. You have this kind of two-faced game that's going on in the Soviet system of trying to appeal to the West, particularly the intellectuals of the West, guys like your boy Sartre, who were still pro-Soviet and believing in communism, but trying to hide all of the killing that was done in the labor camps and all this terrible stuff that had happened, to try and say the system was still a good system despite these injustices and deaths. So, but it was a very fine line to walk, and you wanted to expose some of it, that Stalin was a bad guy and we're going to take a new direction, but you didn't want to expose so much that people would say the whole system was wrong. So I think you had this crackdown that did come in the late 50s, especially in Hungary, and that invasion and occupation. This was perhaps a result of this opening of criticism of the Soviet system that eventually in 57 had to be shut down and once again had to be repressed. So Shalamov was writing during this whole period, but what do you do with this writing? Because it could easily be used as propaganda by the West to incite rebellions, just like the rebellion you saw in Budapest. It's just trying to walk a fine line. I don't know exactly. But in the end, you get a guy like Solzhenitsyn who becomes the focal point of the gulag talk, because his version of the gulags is a little bit more digestible than Shalamov's, which just seems awful and horrible and
Well, I mean, I'm inspired because now that I think that there's been enough distance to reflect appropriately about this person, this Hungarian girlfriend, I think if I were to write a short story, the title would be "Invasion, Occupation, and Crackdown." And it would it would be a lot of.
Did you know what happened to me yesterday? I didn't tell you this. It's I walked out of my apartment. I was going down to the 7-Eleven.
Jesus Christ, the Hungarian girls there selling you slushy?
No, even better. I walked out of my apartment. I'm crossing the street. I'm gonna go walk down Elm Street to the 7-Eleven on the corner. Talk to my buddy, the Asian guy down there. He and his wife run the place. Always working hard. Good people. Good friends of mine.
What type of Asians? Just out of curiosity. Like
I'd say,
Korean,
like,
maybe.
I'd say Korean, Southern Asian, Southeast Asian, something. You know, maybe like Malaysian. I feel like Malaysian.
Hardworking people. Like
great guy.
The Filipinos,
Yeah, they're all good people. But anyway, I went down there for a 6-pack, tall boys, and on my way, I see this guy with a backpack, kind of funny looking guy, harmless, definitely harmless. And I could see him looking at me, but I don't make eye contact. And he stops and he kind of waves this awkward wave, like a foreigner, you know, like one of these goddamn foreigners in this country. And so I stop and he goes, "Hey," with his accent. He's got an accent. He goes, "Are you in a rock band? Are you in some sort of rock band that's playing around here?" And I could tell that it's kind of a bullshit opener line. You know, he's trying to. It's an opener. You know, it's not an opener to fuck me, but it's an opener to talk to me about something. You know, what the fuck you want to talk about? But he's harmless.
Yeah, maybe
so I'm gonna let it go.
Some type,
I don't know
some
what he's
type of
talking
scam. You sense some type of scam.
I don't think he wants money, but he's a foreigner and he's opening me for something. And this rock band thing is just because I got pretty hair and I'm a pretty man and I'm a cool looking dude. And anyway, he's not from around here. So I stop and I start talking to him. And then, you know, he takes out of his backpack one of these Bhagavad Gita books. And I thought, oh, yeah, okay, all right, this is what it's about. He says, have you ever heard of Gandhi or Ralph Waldo Emerson? I said, yeah, I read them all. And he goes, I said, I've read that book you're holding in your hand. I read parts of it. And he said, really? Yeah, you know all these people? I said, sure, of course. And he goes, I am a Hare Krishna. I said, yeah, I used to eat your wonderful Hare Krishna vegetarian food back outside of Chicago years ago. Great stuff. And I said, I know you're going to give me the book, right? I got to make a donation. He said, yes. I said, where are you from? He goes, I'm from Russia. I said, Russia? What's your name? My name is Dmitri. I said, Dmitri, have you ever heard of Varlam Shalamov? He said, no. I said, have you ever heard of Solzhenitsyn? He said, yes. I said, Shalamov is the better man. Shalamov wrote the true shit about the labor camps. He said, really? I said, Dmitri, you're very lucky. You can read him in Russian. You can read his poetry in Russian. And I talked to him a little bit about Shalamov. And he asked me if I wanted to still take the Bhagavad Gita. And I said, no. I've got too many books at home. And I said, the donation money that I might have given you is going to have to go for some tall boys. And I left it at that. Oh, but I did mention to him that I said, where are you staying? And he said, and there's a van over there. And it was parked in front of my building. And I'd seen these guys sitting in there. They were looking on their cell phones, and they looked very suspicious to me, but harmless. And this van was kind of open. It was one of those tall, white Mercedes vans. And he was in there with a bunch of other Russian Hare Krishna dudes, I think. And I'd seen them earlier in the day, and I said, yeah, I saw you bastards over there. You guys are suspicious characters. You got to be a little more careful. And he said, oh, okay. And he's headed down to Houston to give books away and ask for donations and Hari Rama. But hopefully he'll read some Shalamov.
Well, you know,
Shalamov.
I think that he should be distributing Shalamov with the Bhagavad Gita. They're very similar stories. I mean, they're very similar stories about going into the underworld and emerging from the underworld and having something.
Look, Shalamov is as holy as anything that the Indians ever wrote with the Bhagavad Gita. I mean, you get the holy insight of 20 years in a gulag camp. That's fucking religion. That's right in your own country. I mean, what about all those monks and stuff from Dostoevsky, like Aloysia from what's it? Aloysia from what the hell is the famous Dostoevsky with Aloysia? Remember that guy, that monk Aloysia?
Yeah. But I mean, who the fuck are these Russians? I mean, they're basically.
What about Andrei Rublev of Tarkovsky?
Yeah, I mean,
the beauty of these monks.
These guys, but they're.
Why would a Russian turn to a fucking Indian guy and read this shit in translation?
Yeah.
He's got a whole country filled with the most beautiful Orthodox monks that have ever been around.
Well,
these guys are the holiest motherfuckers ever.
And these Russians are, ethnically they've got a lot of Asian in them. I mean, Russia, just geographically where it sits, its proximity to Mongolia.
Right, that's the thing. But that's the thing,
they,
though. They are at the crossroads of Asia and Europe, so they've also inherited all of the oldest Catholic traditions. So they mix that with the Asiatic stuff, and you get this phenomenal religious stuff that is totally otherworldly. I mean, just look at those mosaics, like Andrei General. Remember Andrei Rublev?
It's a very long film. When people ask me about my interest in cinema, I almost am reticent to even talk about Tarkovsky.
Yeah,
Rublev is very, very special. I think it was something like a 5-hour film. It might have been longer in the uncut version, but there's Andrei Rublev, that film by Tarkovsky, and The Stalker is a great film. Is very similar to the Kolima Tales because it's unscripted. There is no narrative. It occurs out of necessity. It's a story that has to be told, and it's not fiction. It's something that happened. It's something that's in the deep spiritual recesses of the Russian consciousness, and it happens so naturally and so slowly and so beautifully, but it's so powerful, like all of Tarkovsky's work, that you can't imagine the Russians wanting to turn anywhere for spiritual guidance.
But I think the Russian people are a bit confused. A lot of this stuff has been suppressed and kept from them, and I mean even the Shalamov stuff, they don't know about Shalamov. I don't think that the Russian government under Putin wants this stuff to be revealed. Putin has gone on a kind of he's made an effort to try and rehabilitate Stalin. Like, he doesn't want Stalin to be viewed as this terrible figure. And so that means something like Shalamov is on the outs. I mean, you still have this suppression of people in literature who said certain things, which for certain administrations is viewed as a good thing, for other administrations is viewed as a bad thing.
And where the fuck was Stalin? Where the fuck was Stalin from? I mean, he wasn't even. Wasn't it the case that he wasn't even Russian? He was
some bumpkin.
Wasn't he from Georgia?
He
was from Georgia.
Yeah, Georgia.
And he spoke Russian with a very hackneyed accent.
I think he had an accent. Yeah, I don't.
And
I mean, the whole story of Stalin is its own thing. But what's interesting, though, is that the past of Russia is still very much viewed as central to its present. Putin is using these ideas. You had the Yeltsin period, which was a very Western period where they were trying to just embrace the West entirely, and now they're going back to this really a cult of personality, but also trying to raise the. I imagine with all the oligarchs taking all the money, they want to raise the sense of being Russian into something beautiful and wonderful to obscure the fact that people are so impoverished and suffering.
Are there people still left in the pockets of the taiga or other remote regions that have been untouched by the state and have been untouched by this imposed narrative of the Russian government? I mean, have there been people always in Russia that perhaps like in the rural South in the United States that have just been untouched by all this shit? I mean, is
well, probably. I don't know. I mean, there's probably people out there. I met this one guy in Ushuaia. Very, very cool Russian cat from Tashkent. That's where he was born. And he told me Siberia was the place. Siberia is the wonderland. And this guy was like some Russian monk out of a Dostoevsky thing. And very cool cat who I want to also bring on a podcast. Vyacheslav Bodkin, I'd love to have on a podcast, but I also want to have this guy on a podcast. So I gotta figure out a way to do it. But both of these Easterners have a lot to offer about places that we just don't know about, and literature we don't know about. And it's not in translation, and it's not being put out there. And I don't know, maybe it's almost better that it's not. this is good stuff for the few who are really open to it, but you know, you kind of have to go to these places and meet these people if you really want to know. So I don't know. I mean, Kolyma. I mean, what Kolyma's like Alaska, I guess. I have no idea.
Kolyma's like Alaska, but it was a place where, you know, it's interesting. The correlate is Alaska is a place of great freedom, but I mean, to really buckle down and survive in Alaska, you have to create a certain prison for yourself. I mean, the boat is a sense of great freedom. Once you pass the breakwaters, you're in international territory. But then you have a 5-day trip, and it's an imposed prison. And similarly, working in the North Slope, you do these 2-week stretches. It's an imposed prison. It's very lucrative, but so the difference between the men who worked in the labor camps and the men who willingly go out to Alaska is just a matter of remuneration and perhaps survival rates. But I mean, it's the severity.
Well,
the severity of the
definitely
landscape
survival
is very similar.
Yeah, survival rates though. If you're not putting in enough calories, that was always the issue. The food rations were so limited, at least the way Shalamov talks about it. You'll read it in the Kolyma Tales, like, you know, it's a death sentence if you're given certain job, because the food rations are so small, and the Russians, I guess the Soviet system at the time, had a crazy idea. It was suicide to do this, but they would offer you the possibility of extra rations if you could increase your workload beyond the quota for the day. But that was truly suicide, because you would be burning up so many calories that the extra rations could not even account for the extra work. And Shalamov, being very, very smart, he figured this out early on. And so he was always trying to do the minimum, and that led him to being beaten all the time by the bosses. And also, I guess he was imprisoned for a while. They put you in this ice cave.
So he traded a beating for perhaps an extension of his life.
But it was still better. Like, he was a smart enough guy. He realized it's still better to keep the calories than not do the work. It's better to be beaten. It's better to be stuck in an ice cave. The problem with when they put you in the ice cave was if you tried to lay down and sleep, your body temperature would drop so much that you'd die during the night. So you had to stay awake while you were imprisoned in this ice cave.
That reminds me of sleeping in my truck in Alaska.
Yeah, the ice cave of your truck. But General, you want to shut this down?
Yeah.
Want to shut this down?
Yeah, we got
an hour and a half. It'll be
hour and a half.
It'll be easy to.
Yep.
So let's 5, 4, 3, 2.